So, what I've given you here is a brief excerpt, but I think a highlight from Plato's Republic. Plato's book, The Republic, it's a very long dialogue having to do with some questions concerning justice. And it goes on for a very long time. And it covers a lot of really interesting uh, issues in politics and ethics and metaphysics and education, a lot of things. But the prime question is something that comes up in the beginning. And that question is whether one should be just or unjust. If you want to live a happy life, what is the best course of action to live a just life, obeying the dictates of justice, or an unjust one where you don't worry about whether what you're doing is right or wrong? Which will make you happy? That's the central question that Plato is dealing with. This is written by Plato, mostly using the character his friend Socrates as the main speaker. But in this, the beginning of the book, we get this rare thing where in the Plato's dialogues, mostly it's just Socrates speaking, really. But here we get a very substantive speech from another character. His name is Thrasymachus. That's how you pronounce that. Thrasymachus. And he has ideas that are very different from Socrates. Um, Socrates says, well, let's look at this question whether it's better to be just or unjust. What do we need to decide in order to really answer that question? And he says the first thing we need to do is determine just what justice is, because we can't know whether it's better to be just or unjust unless we know what justice and injustice, its opposite, are. So he gives a kind of an answer, and this character Thrasymachus has been listening and has just been impatient, almost bursting with desire to give his opinion about what justice is. And what flows from that opinion about what justice is, that idea of what justice is his own answer, Thrasymachus' own answer to the question about whether it's better to be just or unjust. Let's take a look at what he says. Very famous, the first thing in this excerpt. Again, this is just a very brief excerpt from a very long book. But Thrasymachus says, "Listen then," he said, "I proclaim that justice is nothing else than the interest of the stronger," which is a viable way of thinking of things. And, at first, the people around him either don't understand what he's saying or pretend not to understand what he's saying, because then he explains himself. He says, well, the different forms of government make laws. Democratical, if it's a democracy; aristocratical, if it's an aristocracy; tyrannical, if it's a tyranny, with a view to their several interests. And these laws, which are made by them for their own interests, are the justice which they deliver to their subjects. And him who transgresses them, they punish as a breaker of the law and unjust. And that is what I mean when I say that in all states there is the same principle of justice, which is the interest of the government. And as the government must be supposed to have power, the only reasonable conclusion is that everywhere there is one principle of justice, which is the interest of the stronger, which I think is a pretty good explanation. What is he saying? Well, whoever has power gets to define what justice is. They get to make the laws, in other words. And lo and behold, the laws that they make serve their own interest at the expense of everyone else. So this goes for every form of government. He mentions democracies, aristocracies, and tyrannies. Perhaps the simplest one is the laws in a tyranny. A tyranny is the law of one person, usually one man, dominating, ruling the whole community, and he makes laws that benefit him. But if it's an aristocracy, and if it's a rule of a few, like a class rule of several prominent families, then they'll make laws to benefit themselves, and they'll call that justice. It even goes for democracy, the rule of the people. They'll pass laws that are good for them, the common person, at the expense of the other classes, the minorities of the rich, and maybe the aristocrats. So wherever you go, justice is the same, although wherever you go, justice is different, because the laws are different, because they're suiting the particular interest of the ruling party or the ruling person. And that's what's always the same, is you'll find that justice is always defined in any place as basically what is in the interest of the strong, whoever is ruling. And then that seems to be very, very powerful point because, especially to an idealist like Plato, who wants to say that justice, the idea of justice, is something higher and purer than anything like self interest. But that this is the challenge in the beginning of the Republic that Plato needs to respond to. And it's very cleverly done because Plato knows that this is a widely held, very cynical proposition, very cynical belief on the part of many of his contemporaries. And he's trying to overcome it with arguments that there is such a thing as real justice that transcends anybody's interest. But Thrasymachus has basically said there's no justice is just what people say it is, and if they're strong enough to back it up, then they can call it justice. Very, very challenging and cynical way of thinking about a whole bunch of things having to do with justice.